Welcome everybody to Attention Talk Video. I'm cognitive engineer and ADHD coach Jeff Copper. My channel has been on YouTube for a period of time. We release a video every week and we release a short each week. We've also been doing a series of live streams, really talking about my new field of engineering and new ADHD intervention called cognitive ergonomics from the inside out. We did our first live back, I think it was October the 1st, kind of explaining how really the reason why I'm claiming that this is a field of engineering and some basis, the idea that there's a new intervention for people with ADHD that is more like engineering is kind of a bold statement. So we really tried to explain what the components were that enables us to do that. Now, understand that cognitive ergonomics from the inside out is a paradigm shift. It's a completely different way of looking at and understanding ADHD. It's a very non-emotional, very objective way. And so, like any paradigm, it's really difficult for people to conceptualize what it is because it's substantially different. It goes against some of your beliefs, bias, institutional reinforcement. And so what we've been doing is really picking up different topics and talking about some anomalies that the new paradigm explains that the current ones can't, and actually kind of talk about some findings that we've had. And so today, our title is really basically Understanding Overwhelm, which is really more about understanding emotions. So I want to talk about the feeling, and I also want to talk about like objective facts. So within cognitive ergonomics, we define a couple primitive influences, and one of them are emotions. A feeling is the physical manifestation of an emotion, but we define an emotion as a reflex. It's a reflex, right? When you trip, right, reflexively, your arms reach out to brace your fall. Reflexively is an automated response. Imagine that you were out on safari and you're dumb enough to get out of the truck, and all of a sudden a lion starts to chase after you from behind a bush. Well, as a survival mechanism, your brain feels threatened, that's the emotion, with your life. And so reflexively, you go to fight, flight, or freeze. When you're in that state of fight, flight, or freeze, you're particularly if your life is in peril, you're not even thinking rationally. In fact, I would argue hardly really not thinking. At the end of the day, what you're doing is you're emoting. You're jumping to conclusions and you're reacting. And so part of cognitive ergonomics takes a look at emotions as a survival mechanism. More specifically, it's designed to escape peril and escape discomfort, okay? And so one of the things that the model bears out is a few things. Number one is boredom is physically uncomfortable for people with ADHD. When I say physically uncomfortable, it's painful. In our third live stream, we talked about problem solving and put up a graph talking about we use thoughts to think, but at the end of the day, when we're talking about ADHD as an impairment, we're really not talking about general thinking. We're talking about problem solving. And we broke things down a little bit more detail to understand what that was. But people with ADHD, they struggle because ADHD is an executive functioning impairment, and problem solving inside your head is uncomfortable. And so whenever something's uncomfortable, the ADHD reflexively wants to escape. So when you look at ADHD, it looks like a focus problem, and it is, but the root cause often is really difficult thinking. When thinking is difficult, there's a reflexive urge to escape it. So again, let's break this down into some things about the model. A lot of times people with ADHD, they say, I feel overwhelmed. Now understand overwhelm is a feeling, all right? I feel overwhelmed, which kind of makes some sense. But if you look at overwhelm just as overwhelming, really people with ADHD emotionally are just escaping. What cognitive ergonomics does is we look at it a little bit differently. When the cognitive load, in other words, the amount of thinking or problem solving that you need to do exceeds your capacity to do it, that's overwhelmed. A way of thinking like this is imagine a truck could hold or support 5,000 pounds. If you put 50,000 pounds on the truck, it would crush the truck, right? So overwhelm is the same type of thing. There's more cognitive thinking that needs to be done than you have the capacity to do it. So why is that helpful? Well, now we can problem solve. We've either got to reduce the load or we've got to increase your ability or cognitive capacity. Now, as I've said before, ADHD is an executive function impairment. Just trying harder is not necessarily going to, like if I'm trying to read without my glasses, just trying harder is not going to help. What I need is the accommodation. So for people with ADHD, if we can begin accommodating the thinking, making it easier to collaborate and think outside your head, now you're able to increase your load, all right, and reduce some of that cognitive backlog, right? So again, we're talking about the word overwhelm. There is the emotional side that people go to, but there's this emotion, like what do you do with regard to it? But then there's the practical side, the I've got to lower the load or increase the capacity in order to get there, and maybe I should get accommodations for that. Another thing that's common for people with ADHD is that notion you're trying to change your emotions around something. This is where a lot of people are going to disagree with me, but in the model, basically we talk about motivation. And basically everybody's got a motivation blueprint that's based off of your primitive urges, emotion, this thing called dopamine. But what you're attracted to varies by person. Like some people love golf. They're nutso about golf. I play it, but it's not that big of a deal. I really like ahas and I really like swimming. We all have our own motivational blueprint. And so as I try to describe to people, everything you've ever done in your entire life, you did it because you were motivated to do it. And everything you haven't done, you didn't do at the time you could do it because you were actually motivated to do something else. So people have a tendency to take a look at motivation as something that they need to get. They're changing their emotions. They're trying to get psyched up. They're trying to use grit. They're trying to use deadlines. Again, using the emotions to overcome the emotional urge to escape. And honestly, I haven't seen that work very consistently. Lifetime. I mean, there's some people that can do it. And yeah, emotions, people can have belief systems and they can go charging into some things. I'm not going to deny that, but day in and day out, it's typically a lot easier to change your environment, right, than it is to change your emotion. So let's go back to overwhelm. If problem solving is difficult inside your head, right, and there's emotional urge to escape, if you were to sit in an environment and collaborate with somebody, all right, when you run into a moment of ambiguity or some uncertainty or just trying to think through something, you could talk out loud with somebody and begin to problem solve. That's a different environment, okay, than just doing it by yourself. And so if you change that environment and it's easier for you to do what you're trying to accomplish, right, then you do it because it's not as uncomfortable. So again, our idea here is so much people are trying to focus on changing their emotion to get something done as opposed to accommodating it by changing the environment. There's another manifestation of this, as I've been saying, that if you take a look at your procrastination list, I think that you'll find that about 80% of it is rooted in some level of ambiguity, right? A lot of times I'm coaching people and asking them what's hard about what they're doing to try to help them think. And a lot of times they'll say fear. Again, fear is an emotion, right? Now, I don't discount the fact that, let's say hypothetically that you've taken an exam and failed it 5 times, whether it's the bar, boards, tests, algebra test or whatever. I don't deny that there might be fear because you have failed it before in the past, but the question really is why did you fail it and what's going on? Because a lot of times maybe you've not done it because of the ambiguity, or maybe you've committed to do tasks before and you haven't gotten it done because of the underlying ambiguity. If you pause and move past the fear, right, and take a look at what it is that you're doing and why you haven't performed very well in the past, you can begin to identify as, oh, either I haven't studied for the test properly, or I wasn't really clear on what I was doing, right? We've talked about that in our third live stream. And when you get to that level, you can begin to go problem solving. So this is a true story. I've had people before that were students that had failed a test multiple times. And when I started working with them, they didn't really know their natural way of studying, and working with them to help them use their dominant learning modalities to digest the information. They knew the material and thus were able to pass the test. Again, cognitive ergonomics is really about moving past the emotions and seeing what's there technically so that we can actually sit down and try to problem solve to come up with the solutions to actually get to the answer. Let's see, what else? So at the end of the day, one of the things that's brilliant about Dr. Barkley's model on ADHD as an executive function impairment is he defines emotions as being a big part of it. So we know that self-regulation is a huge executive function. We know that it's important for people with ADHD to regulate their attention, but what he also brings out, it's important to regulate your emotion. When your emotions are dysregulated, your attention is dysregulated, okay? So a lot of times I'm dealing with people as, oh my God, I feel overwhelmed. That's an emotion. Now you're dysregulated. Now you're not thinking factually, like what's really, really, really going on. By layering that out and taking that away, we can take a look at what's going on. We also begin to understand how ADHD, while right now emotions are not a part of the diagnostic criteria, they really need to be added. So again, what the model bears out is what ADHD looks like is a focused problem, and it is, but if you dig a little bit deeper and you understand, it's typically an emotional urge to escape the discomfort of thinking. And when I say thinking, I'm not talking about daydreaming or worrying or judging or forming an opinion or a belief or learning or contemplating. I'm talking about specifically applying knowledge to solve a problem. So with that, Pam, by chance, do we have anybody out there in chat with questions?
No questions. We have some comments. Green Giant is a new viewer, first time here. Donald said he has tried Anthony Robbins' plan and ordered the tapes, went to 2 seminars. He says motivating, relieves discomfort, but doesn't set a baseline.
It's interesting. Tony Robbins has been, and a lot of other people are out there. They do a lot of discussing of what's going on, and they talk about some methodologies. And I found a lot of people go and they get excited about it just because of the excitement emotionally. It lasts for about a day, maybe 2, 3 tops, and then they struggle with it because a lot of times it goes back to what I'm saying. Just getting excited about something will help, but it doesn't resolve the underlying problem. In the case of people with ADHD is, again, help with the problem solving. It's not the writing down of a goal, it's the execution, the things that are required to get that done. I'll illustrate this by true story. I was coaching a gentleman one time, and we were talking, and he needed to get his mother a Mother's Day card. And he wrote it on his to-do list, and I'm a coach. I deal with people with ADHD. And any other conversation would have ended. And I said, well, I tell you what, where are you going to get a Mother's Day card? He said, a store. Okay, understand that was an emotional response, believe it or not. I said, really, what store? Now, when I asked him what store, now he's actually got to think. He said, Hallmark store. I said, okay, when are you going to buy it? I kind of don't. It's going the other direction. Really? How far away is it? It's about 10 minutes. Oh, so it's a 25-minute round trip, like, because you got to go out of your way to go do that. He said, I guess so. I said, when do you have 25 minutes to go out of your way? What I'm illustrating here is that the goal was to send his mother a Mother's Day card. As I'm asking questions about what he needs to do to send a Mother's Day card, we're starting to find out it's really more complicated than it sounds. That thinking from the goal on your to-do list of what you need to do, it's that, oh, where am I going to get a card? When am I going to get it? How am I going to, all that stuff is the part of ADHD that people struggle with. So again, there's a lot of motivational people that get you kind of excited, but a lot of times it doesn't address the underlying issues of what you're going to do in order how to execute it. So thank you, Don. Let's see, anything else we have by chance? Pam?
Donald also shared that he has failed algebra 3 times in college. Hope it gets better.
I can relate to that a little bit. I struggled. I'm sorry. So part of cognitive ergonomics, we talk about when you have to retrieve existing knowledge, there's different ways. One's called free recall, cued recall, and recognition recall. Free recall is when you're getting knowledge of the past from like a filing cabinet in your head, if you will, just like out of the blue at the right time when you need it. It's a way of remembering things, but it's not very reliable. Cued recall is something cues you, like a reminder is a cue, like, oh, yeah, I got that. And recognition is, oh, I've seen that before and I recognize it. When I was in algebra, I would have a hard time remembering often the formulas, but also the order of operations. I would study that knowledge, but I would have a hard time remembering with it. Now, if I could walk in with a cheat sheet of what the order was and what the formulas were, I didn't have to retrieve that knowledge and I could work my way through it. But a lot of times I would be studying outside the class and I would walk in and I would kind of forget it as I went in. Now, that's not to say that, Don, that's your issue, but I can relate. I had a real difficult time, and it was mostly the knowledge of what the specific steps were in order to execute them, particularly since it wasn't anything that I could relate to. A lot of times we were solving problems that really I couldn't care about. Oddly enough, when I got to college, I took probability math, which was funny because it was the first time that I actually understood what I was solving for. It got to the point in time where I would derive my own equations in class or on a test, just based off the background. In that situation, I understood what was going on. I didn't have to retrieve the knowledge. I could just apply it. So that's just a bit of a sharing a side note. So
Green Giant says she's the queen of overcomplicating things, but conflicted with needing a step-by-step process for most tasks.
Step-by-step process is like one of those things where again, the ambiguity of what's the order of operations, if you know the step-by-step that you go into and it's all written down, I call that methodical thinking when we get into the program. And by the way, we define when you're trying to solve problems, there's methodical thinking, there's trial and error thinking, what we call insightful thinking. Each one of them can be good for people with ADHD or poor depending on the situation. But a lot of times you just need those steps come out. Now, sometimes overcomplicating is where you've got other variables that are coming into play. So sometimes it's easier to isolate things one at a time. But often with people with ADHD, you get stuff in your head. And like for me, an idea will come in and I'll forget it. And another idea will come in that's related to something else. And it just gets kind of hard to get it all kind of like, okay, all of this is related to this thing. All of this is related to that thing. A lot of times it's easier if I'm talking through that with somebody. Pam can attest to that. I call her quite a bit with some of my other people when I'm trying to figure out the simplicity of something, or just like what is the easiest way to get through that. So it's I can relate to that myself. But one of the keys is often is to get somebody to kind of help you think through it.
I think that's it for today.
All right, everybody, thanks for attending. I appreciate your listening to this. At the end of the day, I'm here having these conversations because they're more in-depth conversations than what I would normally do somewhere else, because I like people to understand the underlying background of this. If you know of anybody that has ADHD, please share this with them. I'm hoping that we are logically explaining stuff and it resonating with you. And we're actually kind of showing sometimes why what's out there with current interventions often are falling short for people with ADHD. And I hope we're going to explain them. So for example, we've talked about behavioral training is kind of the way that people help people with ADHD, which is basically teaching you a skill. Do this to get an outcome that requires executive functions. We're saying, no, that falls short because there's an impairment. Rather than try to train your brain, we need to accommodate your brain, all right, for it to do it's that way. The same thing, I'm not going to try to use behavioral training to read. I'm trying to use glasses in order to accommodate the impairment. So with that, please
Jeff,
spread the word.
We have a last minute comment from R Mode,
Okay.
who says, I have a self-help notebook based on some information regarding cognitive ergonomics from the inside out.
All right, thank you. All right, I hope it's helping you. We are spoon-feeding this stuff out there. And here's the thing. One thing we haven't talked about is whenever you have something that you're having a hard time with ADHD, you just sit there and you look at it and you say, what's hard, right? Is it boring? Is it ambiguous? Does it require a lot of cognitive thinking? And then there's something else called the boot up. We haven't talked about that, where you have to become familiar with it. If you look at it that way and identify what the underlying problem is, the next step would be to say, what would be the easiest way to get it done, right? The easiest way to get done can, like aliens and unicorns, could help you. But the idea is, by saying what's the easiest way to do that, it gets you out of your head, and then you try to solve the problem for as close to what would be easy as possible. So we'll throw that out there a little bit because we're hoping to do another live on that soon. So with that, I know I've got to get ready for a call, so we'll wrap it up. Thanks everybody for joining us, and thanks, Pam.